I was sitting at the head table at my daughter's rehearsal dinner when the groom's father walked through the door. I had heard about him for 8 months. James Whitmore, successful real estate developer from Charleston. Widower. Charming, Sarah had told me. Very old money Southern, she said with a laugh. You two will get along perfectly. Dad and I had looked forward to meeting him. The room was warm with candlelight and the smell of gardenias. 60 guests, white linen tablecloths, a string quartet playing in the corner. My daughter Sarah, 29 years old, the most extraordinary person I have ever known, was standing near the bar in her rehearsal dress laughing at something her maid of honor had said. She looked the way a person looks when everything in their life is exactly where it is supposed to be. And then James Whitmore walked through the door. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a dark blazer, scanning the room with the easy confidence of a man who had walked into important rooms his entire life. His eyes found mine across the crowd. And in the space of a single breath, I watched his face do something I had seen only once before in my life. I had seen it 19 years ago, across a courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia, on the face of a man the jury had just found guilty. I picked up my glass. I set it back down. I smiled at him from across the room. And I made a decision in that moment that would take everything I had to keep, that if you found your way here today, I am more grateful than I can say. Tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you joining from? Let's see how far this story travels. Please note, some elements of this story are fictional, crafted to entertain and to teach. Any resemblance to actual names or locations is purely coincidental. But every lesson woven into it was written with you in mind. My name is Walter Gaines. I am 66 years old. For 32 years I worked as a senior investigative analyst for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the last 14 of those years running financial crimes and white-collar fraud cases out of the Atlanta field office. I retired in 2018 with a desk full of commendations and a filing cabinet full of cases that never fully let me go. My wife Margaret passed in 2017 after a long illness. She was 58 years old and the most graceful person I have ever known. The grief of losing her is something I carry quietly, the way you carry things you have learned you cannot put down. Sarah is our only child. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which means she is almost impossible to argue with and completely impossible not to love. She became a pediatric nurse at 37 and has spent the last 4 years working at a children's hospital in Savannah, Georgia. She is the single best thing my life has produced. I do not say that lightly. 8 months ago, Sarah called me on a Tuesday afternoon from the parking lot of her hospital, her voice carrying the particular brightness that I had not heard since before her mother got sick. Dad, she said, I need to tell you something. I met someone. His name was Thomas Whitmore, 32 years old, son of James Whitmore, a real estate developer based in Charleston, South Carolina. They had met at a charity gala in Savannah. He was kind, she said, genuinely kind, not the performed kind. I asked the questions any father asks. I listened the way a father listens when his daughter sounds happy for the first time in a long time. I told her I was glad for her. I'm in it completely. And I want you to understand that before everything else, because what I am about to tell you is difficult, and it would be easy to read it wrong without knowing that. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restored plantation house outside Savannah on a Friday evening in October. I arrived early because that is my habit, 32 years of arriving early to things so I could read the room before anyone knew I was reading it. I found the table with my name card, sat down, ordered a club soda, and watched the room fill with the warm noise of people who believed they were celebrating something beautiful. Sarah came to me first. She hugged me the way she has hugged me since she was 7 years old, both arms, her face pressed into my shoulder for just a moment longer than a casual greeting. She smelled like gardenias and the specific happiness of a woman who had found something she had stopped expecting to find. You look incredible, I told her. She laughed. You're legally required to say that. I watched her move back across the room toward Thomas, and I felt a fullness in my chest that I have no better word for than gratitude. The plain, aching kind. 20 minutes later, the doors at the far end of the room opened and James Whitmore walked in. He was exactly as Sarah had described him. Tall, silver-haired, the bearing of a man who had never once in his life been unsure of his welcome in a room. He shook hands with the wedding coordinator, kissed the cheek of Thomas's aunt, and turned to survey the gathered guests with an expression of generous, practiced warmth. And then his eyes found mine. I was watching him the way I had watched 1,000 people across 1,000 rooms. Not obviously. The way you learn to watch when watching is your work. Steady and still, and taking everything in. His face did not crumble. It did not go pale. A man like James Whitmore had spent too many years managing his expressions for something as visible as that. But there was a moment. Less than 2 seconds. A rapid internal calibration. The eyes narrowing by a fraction, a barely perceptible stillness moving through the jaw. The specific micro-expression of a man who has just seen something he did not expect and is already deciding how to handle it. I had seen that expression once before. On March 14, 2005. In Courtroom 4 of the Fulton County Superior Court in Atlanta, Georgia. On the face of a man named Raymond Aldrich. He crossed the room toward me with his hand already extended, his smile already fully operational. "Walter Gaines, I presume," he said. "James Whitmore. I have heard a great deal about you." His handshake was firm. His eye contact was perfect. His voice carried not a single tremor. He was extraordinary. And I smiled and shook his hand and told him that Thomas was a credit to him. Because that is what you do when you are 32 years in investigative work and the evidence is not yet complete. You smile. You shake the hand. You go back to work. I excused myself at 9:15 and walked out to the garden at the back of the plantation house. The October air was cool and thick with the smell of the marsh. I stood at the far edge of the garden, away from the lights and the music, and I breathed slowly until my hands were completely still. Then I pulled out my phone. Raymond Aldrich. I had not said that name out loud in 14 years. But I had never stopped knowing it, the way you never stop knowing the cases that got away from you. Raymond Aldrich was convicted in March of 2005 on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of identity theft after a 2-year investigation into a scheme that had defrauded 4 elderly investors in the Atlanta area of a combined total of $2.4 million. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. He served 4.5 with good behavior. He was released in October of 2009. I had been the lead analyst on that case. I had sat across from Raymond Aldrich in an interrogation room for 6 hours on a cold January morning in 2004. Watching him be charming and cooperative and completely, brilliantly misleading. He had looked different then. Darker hair, heavier, younger by 15 years, and the particular kind of trouble that hadn't yet become invisible. But the eyes were the same. I stood in that garden and pulled up the Georgia Department of Corrections public database on my phone, which I still had bookmarked from habit the way old investigators keep habits, and I searched the name. Raymond Aldrich. Released October 2009. Last known address, Atlanta, Georgia. I searched James Whitmore. Real estate developer. Charleston, South Carolina. Company registered 8 years ago. I stood very still. 8 years ago. 1 year before Raymond Aldrich's parole supervision ended. I went back inside. I found my seat. I ate the salad course and the fish course and the dessert course. I made conversation with the woman to my left about her garden and the man to my right about college football. And across the table, James Whitmore laughed and raised his glass and was the most charming man in the room. My daughter sat beside him looking at her future husband with the uncomplicated happiness I had been praying she would find again since the day we buried her mother. I smiled. I raised my own glass. I said all the right things. Inside my chest, the 32 years of work I had tried to leave behind were very quietly coming back online. I left the dinner at 10:30. I drove the 40 minutes back to my house in Savannah with the radio off and my hands at 10 and 2 and my mind doing what it had always done with partial information. Building the framework, identifying the gaps, mapping what I knew against what I needed to know before I could be certain. Because certainty was the only thing that mattered now. Not suspicion, not memory, not the gut instinct of a man who had spent 3 decades learning to read faces. Evidence. I needed evidence so complete that it could not be argued with by anyone, including my daughter, who loved this man's son and who deserved the truth delivered with the same care she had been given her entire life. I got home at 11:15 and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote 3 questions in the handwriting I used when I was working rather than living. Who is James Whitmore really? What does he want from this marriage? How much time do I have? I looked at those 3 questions for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called the one person I called when I needed verification before anything else. A woman named Donna Reese, retired FBI, 28 years in financial crimes. currently doing private investigative consulting out of Atlanta. Donna had worked parallel cases with me for a decade and a half and was the sharpest person I had ever shared a conference table with. "Donna," I said when she answered, "I need you to run a name for me. Tonight, if possible." She didn't ask why. That was one of the things I valued most about her. "What name?" she said. "James Whitmore. Charleston, South Carolina. Real estate. Company registered approximately 8 years ago." A pause. Then, "And the other name?" "Raymond Aldrich," I said. "Atlanta. Released October 2009. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll call you by morning," she said. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, looking at the 3 questions on the legal pad. Then I folded the page and put it in my shirt pocket, close to my chest, and went to bed. I did not sleep. Donna called at 6:22 in the morning. "Walter." Her voice was the specific flatness of someone carrying information they wish they did not have. "Listen to me carefully." "I'm listening," I said. "James Whitmore's company, Whitmore Property Group, was registered in South Carolina 8 years and 3 months ago. The registered agent is a law firm in Columbia. The principal address is a mail forwarding service. There is no physical office." I sat up. "The company has produced 4 real estate transactions in 8 years. All 4 were residential properties. All 4 were purchased with private buyer financing." She paused. "Walter, the buyers on all 4 transactions were elderly individuals. 2 of them are deceased. The estates of both deceased buyers are currently in probate." My jaw tightened. "The total value transferred across those 4 transactions," Donna continued, "is approximately $3.1 million. I pressed my thumb and forefinger hard against the bridge of my nose. "The identity," she said. "I ran both names against the biometric database through a contact still active at the Bureau. Raymond Aldrich and James Whitmore are the same person." She paused. 4-point match on the facial recognition scan. "That is beyond any reasonable doubt." I exhaled slowly. "There is one more thing," Donna said. "Tell me." "Your daughter's name, Sarah Gaines. She appears in a public filing connected to Whitmore Property Group. 8 weeks ago, the company filed an amended operating agreement with the Secretary of State's office in South Carolina. The amendment adds a beneficiary designation." My blood went cold. "Sarah is listed," Donna said, "as a secondary beneficiary to the company's asset portfolio. The designation would become active upon legal marriage." I stood up from my kitchen table. "He targeted her," I said. My voice came out very quiet. "He targeted her specifically," Donna confirmed. "Walter, the beneficiary filing was made 6 weeks after Thomas and Sarah announced their engagement publicly on social media." I looked out the kitchen window at the Savannah morning light coming through the oak trees in my backyard. This was not a chance meeting at a charity gala. He had found her. He had put his son in her path. And in 4 days, my daughter was going to marry into the most precisely constructed financial trap I had ever seen. Before I tell you what I found inside that company filing and what James Whitmore had planned for the week after the wedding, drop a 9 in the comments so I know you are still with me. Every single number tells me you are here, and that means everything to me. And a quick note, the story ahead contains some fictional elements built purely for reflection and for the lessons inside it. If that is not the kind of story you are looking for right now, this is a good place to step away. No hard feelings at all. I called my son-in-law to be's mother on Saturday morning. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. Thomas Whitmore was 22 years old when his father was convicted and sent to prison. He had been raised partially by his mother, Caroline Whitmore, who had divorced Raymond Aldrich. She had never taken his assumed name. In 2004, the year before the trial, she had spent the years since rebuilding her life in Charlotte, North Carolina, working as an accountant, raising Thomas with the specific, quiet determination of a woman who understood exactly what she had married and was determined her son would be different. Thomas did not know who his father really was. That was the first thing Caroline told me when I reached her. "He has never known," she said. Her voice was careful and exhausted in the way voices get when someone has been carrying a weight for a very long time. "Raymond found him 3 years ago, told him he had changed, told him he wanted to be in his son's life. Thomas is a good person, Mr. Gaines. He wanted to believe his father was too." My chest tightened. "Does he know what his father does?" I asked. "He knows about the real estate company," she said. "He thinks it's legitimate." She paused. "I tried to warn him when he told me his father was coming to Savannah. Thomas told me I was holding on to old anger." "I understand that," I said. Donna had spent Saturday building the documentation file. By Sunday evening, she had a complete financial forensics summary, the biometric confirmation report, the operating agreement amendment listing Sarah as a beneficiary, and a cross-reference timeline placing Raymond Aldrich at or near each of the 4 property transactions under the Whitmore name. On Sunday night, I drove to Thomas's apartment. He opened the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, clearly not expecting company, and looked at my face the way young people look at the faces of older people they trust when something is wrong. "Mr. Gaines." He stepped back. "Come in. Is Sarah okay?" "Sarah is fine," I said. "Sit down, Thomas. I need to show you something." I sat across from him at his kitchen table, and I laid out the documents the way I had laid out documents across 32 years of telling people things they did not want to hear. Methodically, completely, without embellishment. Thomas did not speak for a very long time after I finished. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "He used me," Thomas said. I looked at the young man across the table from me. 22 years old when his father went to prison. 32 years old now, sitting in his kitchen the night before his wedding rehearsal, understanding for the first time what he had been positioned to do without knowing it. "Your father used you," I said. "You did not use anyone. There is a very important difference." Thomas pressed both hands over his face. His shoulders shook once. "What do I do?" he said. "You let me handle your father," I said. "And you decide whether you still want to marry my daughter." He looked up. I looked back at him steadily. "I want to marry Sarah more than I have ever wanted anything," he said. His voice was certain in the way that young men's voices are certain when they have found the thing that matters most to them. "She is everything." "Then marry her," I said, "with nothing between you. No secrets, no hidden structures, no amended operating agreements." Thomas nodded slowly. "What do I have to do?" "Trust me for 48 more hours," I said. He trusted me. Donna filed the evidence package with the FBI field office in Charleston on Monday morning. The agent assigned was a woman named Special Agent Patricia Holt. She was thorough, direct, and when I walked her through the timeline, she asked precisely the right questions in precisely the right order, which told me everything I needed to know about her. "I want him to take one more action before we move," she told me. "Something current that adds to the federal charge." "He will," I said. "The wedding is Wednesday. He will try to accelerate the beneficiary designation before the ceremony. He has done this before. He moves fast once the legal structure is in place." She moved fast once the legal structure was in place. "She will try," Agent Holt said. "How do you want to handle the ceremony?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That is either very smart or very theatrical, Mr. Gaines." 32 years, I said. Usually both. On Monday evening I sat with Sarah in her apartment and told her everything. It was the hardest conversation I have had since I sat beside Margaret's hospital bed in the final days and tried to find words that were both honest and kind. Sarah listened without speaking. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face doing the thing it had always done when something hit her hard, not crumbling, just going very quiet. The expression of someone choosing to process rather than react. When I finished, she looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "Did Thomas know?" she asked. "No," I said. "He did not." She nodded once. "Is he the man I think he is?" "Yes," I said. "He is exactly the man you think he is. He has had a very difficult father, and he has become a good person in spite of it. That does not happen by accident." Sarah was quiet for another long moment. Then she said, her voice steady and completely certain, "I am going to marry him on Wednesday." "I know," I said, "but I want to be there when you talk to his father." I looked at my daughter. Her mother's eyes. My stubbornness. "You will be," I said. The wedding was held in a small white church on the Georgia coast on a Wednesday morning in October. 140 guests. October sunlight through old stained glass. Gardenias at the end of every pew. James Whitmore arrived early, dressed in a dark suit, carrying himself with the ease of a man who believed the hardest part was already done. He found me near the entrance. "Walter," he said warmly. "Quite a day?" "It is," I agreed. There was nothing in his voice or his face to indicate that anything was wrong. He was extraordinary at this. 19 years and a new name and a new life, and he had lost none of it. The ease, the charm, the complete command of whatever room he was standing in. Thomas stepped beside me. James Whitmore looked at his son, and something moved behind his eyes that was not charm and not performance. Something older and more human than either of those things, something that I think despite everything, was real. Thomas held his gaze. "I know who you are," Thomas said. His voice was quiet and very steady. "I know what you did, and I know what you were trying to do here." James Whitmore was still for a moment. Then Agent Holt and her colleague stepped forward from just inside the church entrance. The sound that went through James Whitmore's face in that moment was not visible to anyone who did not know how to look for it. But I had spent 32 years learning how to look. It was not surprise. It was not even fear exactly. It was the specific expression of a man who has been outwitted and is already processing that fact rather than fighting it. He looked at me once more. I held his gaze and said nothing. The guests inside the church did not understand what was happening in the entrance. The ceremony began on schedule. Thomas walked his mother down the aisle with his arms steady and his head up. I walked my daughter down the aisle. She held my arm the way she had held it since she was small, not tightly, just present, her hand folded into the bend of my elbow with the complete trust of someone who knows they will not be let go. At the altar, I placed her hand in Thomas's. He looked at her the way a man looks when he knows exactly what he has been given and is not taking a single second of it for granted. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. It was the best 22 minutes I can remember. Raymond Aldrich, operating as James Whitmore, was charged 4 weeks later with wire fraud, identity fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The FBI investigation absorbed the 4 prior property transactions under the Whitmore name. 2 additional victims were identified beyond the 2 we already knew. He pled guilty in January. Thomas has not spoken to his father since the wedding. I do not know if he ever will. That is a door only he can open or close, and I will not tell him which to do. He is a good man navigating something genuinely difficult, and he is doing it with the same quiet dignity that made my daughter fall in love with him in the first place. Sarah and Thomas live in Savannah now. He took a job with a civil engineering firm there, so she could stay close to the hospital where she works. They have a yellow house 3 blocks from the water with a garden that Sarah refuses to let go unattended for more than 4 days at a time. I have dinner with them every other Sunday. The first Sunday after the wedding, Thomas poured me a glass of sweet tea and sat across from me on the porch and said, "Mr. Gaines, I need to say something to you." "Walter," I said. "Please." "Walter." He looked at the glass in his hands. "I have been trying to figure out what to say to you since Wednesday, and I keep not finding the right words." "You do not need to find them," I said. "I do." He looked up at me. "My father spent 30 years taking things from people. And what you did, what you were willing to do, to protect Sarah, to give me a fair chance, to hand me the truth instead of just using it." He stopped. "You could have just stopped the wedding. You could have taken him down and taken me down with him, and no one would have blamed you." I thought about that. "You were not responsible for what he did," I said. "You were a person he used. Those are different things. And my daughter chose you with her whole heart. I was not going to let his crimes take that from her." Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else for a while. We just sat on the porch and listened to the water a few blocks away and the evening coming in off the marsh. Eventually he said, quietly, "She looks like her mother did when she was happy." I looked at the garden where Sarah was deadheading roses in the last of the afternoon light. "Yes," I said, "she does. I have spent 32 years studying deception. Not the loud, obvious kind. The quiet kind. The kind that dresses well and arrives early and shakes every hand in the room and makes you feel, without ever saying a word about it, that you are lucky to know them. The kind that finds the thing you love most and uses it. I used to believe that experience made you immune. That enough years of seeing through people would eventually make you impossible to fool. It does not work that way. Deception finds the gaps that love creates. And love creates gaps in all of us because it is supposed to. That is not a weakness. That is what it means to be human. What I want to leave you with is this. When something does not sit right, do not dismiss it because you cannot yet explain it. The feeling comes before the evidence. In 32 years, I have learned to trust that feeling the way I trust a compass. Not because it tells me everything, but because it points me toward what I need to find. Pay attention to the people around you. The ones who have always been honest with you. The ones who love you enough to say the hard thing. When they raise their voice in warning, stop. Listen, even when it is inconvenient. Especially when it is inconvenient. I believe I was at that rehearsal dinner because I was supposed to be. You can call that whatever you want. I call it grace. The moment when something larger than yourself puts you in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Not everyone gets that moment. These are my stories. And if even one of them stays with you, if it makes you hold your people a little tighter, pay a little closer attention, trust your instincts a little sooner, then every word was worth writing. This has been a dad's revenge story. If it moved you, if it made you think, I would love to know what you took from it. Leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, I would be honored to have you. More stories are coming. More moments of fathers and families, and the quiet kind of courage that does not make the news, but changes everything. One last thing, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. That means more than I can say. Tell me in the comments, what city, what state, what country are you watching from? Every reply reminds me why these stories matter. A final note before we go. Some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and for the lessons inside them. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, no hard feelings at all. But if you are staying, welcome. The best family story is always the one still being written.